Hey, thanks for tuning in. We have Alan Annand, who is one of the leading Vedic astrologers in the world today. And he's one of the foremost researchers and has presented many conferences. And I think your latest is the Kepler conference, in which you are very active in terms of doing new research and stuff. So thanks for joining me, Alan. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you.
Thank you, Aswin, for having me on it too.
So you are one of the most, I think, as we already spoke in the pre-session, like you are probably the only person who has written a entire book on Parivartana Yoga. So I think it is important for not just for me to kind of expose the important knowledge that you have regarding Parivartana Yoga, which always remains to be a blind side for many astrologers. Astrologers think and they tend to have a prefixed notion that they know what is Parivartana Yoga, they know how Parivartana Yoga works, but that's the manifestation and the results, how we see in terms of while analyzing a particular chart, is not even close to what we have in our mind. So I just thought it would be great to have your views and your expert ideas in terms of how Parivartana Yogas work and how we can use it in practice. Especially, I think I really want to talk about the Viparita Raja Yoga that gets formed through Parivartana Yoga. So, but I think that we will get back to that during the later part of this session. But yeah, how did you kind of start your book, and what was the basic motivation for you to write a book on Parivartana Yoga? Later on, we'll just get into the concept of Parivartana Yoga and stuff.
Okay, so to go back to its genesis, many years ago when I was seeking to be qualified by ACVA, the American College of Vedic Astrology, back in that era, they allowed you to do one of two things for your final level of certification. You could do a detailed analysis of 10 charts, writing 2 or 3 or 4 pages on each one of those charts, or you could write a 10,000 word thesis. Well, because I'm a writer, writing things comes easily to me, and 10,000 words didn't sound like very much. So I thought about it a bit, and Parivartana Yoga was something that kind of interested me because I kind of crunched the numbers on it, and I had determined that roughly 43% of mankind has a Parivartana Yoga in their chart. So knowing it's one of the most common yogas, and I've at one time or another published a graph showing this, it's far more common than any of the Raja Yogas, Dana Yogas, or many of the other common yogas that we use all the time. So knowing it was very common, I thought it would be of interest, and I thought it would be a good exercise for me to do. So I ended up writing this thesis for ACVA, which I blew right by my 10,000 word count very easily. Next thing I know, I had 25,000, 30,000 words, I guess. Submitted it as my thesis and got my certification. Well, actually years went by and I didn't do anything with it. But at one point, I was in close contact with Hart Defoe's guru, Mantraji, here in Toronto. And he always used to say to me, I used to ask him sometimes, is it right conduct, or is it a noble profession to write fiction, to write novels? He kind of rolled his eyes a little bit. He said, well, it's a creative act, and it's good in that respect. But he said, you should be writing astrology books. And I said to him, Mantraji, I'd love to, but I don't feel like there's anything new to say. I don't have anything original to say. What could I do? And he said, well, you think about it, you will come up with something. And he said, once you start, you will not finish. And so that was kind of funny. Anyway, so I thought back, wow, I'm sitting on this thesis, and maybe I should look at that and expand it. So I went to work on it, and I expanded it. It went from 30,000 words to whatever, 85,000 words or something like that. Did a lot more research and turned it into a full-blown book, which serves the need for Vedic astrologers, because I spent a lot of time on Facebook typically in the Jyotish groups. And I was always surprised to find that many people really didn't seem to have a very good idea of Parivartana Yoga's interpretation. And so I thought, well, this is coming at the right time. This will help people, in their effort to understand this yoga and interpret it for the sake of their friends, associates, or clients as well. So I hope it's serving that need. Many times, one of the common mistakes that people make, I think, in looking at Parivartana Yoga is, let's say if it's Jupiter or Saturn, they say, well, Saturn owns two signs, two houses. Jupiter owns two signs and two houses. Which ones do I, involve in the interpretation? That sort of blew my mind that people were confused about this very simple concept. You don't look at all four houses. You only look at the two houses that those two planets occupy and rule at the same time. And that's your focus, just two houses. And then if you know your house associations, and anybody can, read up on this and memorize the stuff, and then you just start to play this kind of game in your mind. What if, the Lord of the 6th was in the 10th, while the Lord of the 10th was in the 6th? What would it do for either one of those houses? And you play kind of word association with yourself, and you come up with an interpretation. And well, people don't even have to do that anymore now, because I did all the heavy lifting and sat down with house associations and the nature of the planets themselves, of course, and worked all this out, so that for every combination, there's at least 7 to 10 different points of interpretation that you can apply. Sometimes they're health related, sometimes they're about the people in your lives, sometimes there may be a spiritual context, and so on and so forth. So it's a lot of information there.
Okay, so I think that's one of the most interesting beginnings that we could have had for this session. You mentioned about how people confuse the lordships or the other houses those two planets own, but it is all about the planets that it is all about the houses that in which those two planets are placed. So
the occupation.
Yeah, the occupation. So this is I think this is a misnomer that considering the other lordships, I think this is a misnomer that has developed over a period of time, and this must not have been the case. So if you see, whatever you say is largely the understanding of the medieval astrologers of the Islamic tradition, and later on we find the same in the works of William Lilly as well. So I think mutual reception has been it has been given in a much more concise and clear manner in those traditions than the modern Vedic astrologers have done or dealt with it. So which is why your book kind of stands out in the market in terms of being one of the most important books in Vedic astrology itself. So yeah, and the other, coming back to your book is it kind of sets the tone straight away in terms of, if you look at the index, you were pretty much clear in terms of how you were going to deal with the book. You gave 3 bifurcations of Parivartana Yoga as Maha Parivartana Yoga, Kala Parivartana Yoga, and Dainya Parivartana Yoga. So from there you start, and then you go on with benefics and malefics and other basic stuff that involves Parivartana Yoga, and then you directly move on to the house lords. So it's like you continue with first house lord involved in a Parivartana, or second house lord involved in a Parivartana, and so on. So
right.
I think no one has ever clearly done this work. So and getting back to one of the most important things, you mentioned avasthas in the appendix. So how crucial are avasthas in terms of determining Parivartana Yogas? Because when we talk about Vedic astrology, we are basically using, most of the Vedic astrologers use whole sign houses, and we take one sign as a whole thing. And
Right.
degrees don't really matter, especially in Indian practice. I don't see astrologers using degrees in a larger way. Maybe the upcoming astrologers of current era use degrees, but Indian astrologers tend to begin with Nadi astrology, and we don't care about the degrees when you talk about Nadi astrology, and it's basically about the geometrical and astronomical relationships of of the planets and their placements. So, but when it comes to actual analysis, do you think degrees really matter because we are using holes in houses? I'm sure, I think I have had a notion that degrees matter whenever a planet is applying to a perfect reception or an aspect with another planet. I think the intensity of the functioning of that particular pair of planets that are involved in mutual reception will be much more than uh, usual stuff where when planets are not closely related in terms of degrees. Do you agree with that?
Well, degrees do matter. Just before I talk about that within the context of Parivartana Yoga, just consider this. You could have two planets in a sign, and if they're separated by 3 or 4 or 5 degrees or whatever, we simply say that they are associated. But if those two planets are within less than 1 degree of longitude apart from each other, and if they are the true planets, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, or Saturn, you then have a situation of what is called Graha Yuddha, planetary war. And then that's a problem for one or the other of those planets, and specifically for the departments of life that they rule, whether it's a person in your life or some area of activity or whatever. So the degrees do matter in that context. But in the context of Parivartana Yoga, yeah, degrees matter as well too, because there are two basic notions with Parivartana Yoga. The basic notion, the basic concept is that you look at a chart, you see, one planet in the 6th and the other in the 10th, but they are in each other's signs. So that's where they are in reality, in a snapshot of the skies. But in your mind's eye, in your imagination, you can basically exchange those two planets. And I mean, Parivartana does, if you take the word apart, it means to and fro, back and forth, barter, trade, swap, exchange. So that's why it's called Parivartana Yoga, because they consider kind of a movable yoga in that respect. So in your mind's eye, you have those two planets exchange positions. But let's say now the two notions are that the planet can move from its original sign to the other sign, carrying its own degree of longitude, or it can move into the other sign and step directly into the footprint left by the other planet with which it is exchanging signs. So if you follow me, each planet starts off with its original degree, and you might say that exchange will require them each to flip over into the other sign and take the exact same degree position that the other planet held. That's one notion, and you can do that. But you can also say, I will take my planet from house 6 with its specific degree of longitude, and I will transfer that degree into that other house or sign as well. Well, what if the sun is in that other degree, is in that very same degree in that other house? That means that upon exchange, you will be placing your movable planet into a condition of combustion. Or conversely, the original planet could have been combust, but when it moves to the other sign, it will not be. So you can play around with these notions, and you can, depending on the context, choose to do it that way or consider both, and what are the ramifications of either one of those choices. I mean, that sounds complicated, but as you know, this is the sort of thing that goes on, in the brain of an astrologer who says, well, there's possibility A of looking at it like this, or B looking at it like that, or C looking at it from yet another angle. But we do that all the time. There's the Udaya Lagna, the ascendant that is actually the physical horizon, but we also have Chandra Lagna. and we can look at the chart from that point of view, or Surya Lagna from the points of view of moon or sun being the ascendant. It's just another perspective that we can take. And so it is with the degree positions of planets in exchange. It's a choice.
Okay, so having said this, let's say Jupiter is placed in Sagittarius, sorry, Mars is placed in Sagittarius and Jupiter is placed in Aries. Would you consider, would you just, how do you delineate this? Would you ever consider that like Jupiter is placed in Sagittarius itself and Mars is placed in Aries itself? Would you give that kind of a delineation?
Well, for the moment, let's put them in houses, because that's where it gives us meaning, right? The signs are just a vehicle for the exchange of the two planets, you know, because Jupiter's in Mars sign while Mars is in Jupiter sign. So let's place them in let's say the 1st and the 9th. So right away, these are Dharma houses. These are fire houses. Houses 1 and 9 are associated with spirituality, as is Dharma, as is fire to a certain degree. So you might immediately go down the road of saying that this has got something to do with a relationship with the father, a relationship with the guru, a relationship with the Dharma, with Shastra, with teaching, with the spiritual life, and so on. Now, the whole difference is if we rotate that by just one sign and say that those two planets are now in the 2nd house and the 10th house, our interpretation changes entirely, because now these are Artha houses that are associated with money, work, and professional career. And so now your interpretation might very well revolve around something to do with job, employment, professional choices, education, because the 2nd house is education, as well as what comes out of the mouth. And the 10th house is the career, public status. So you might invoke things like the capacity for public speaking, an education that leads to a professional career, the money that arises as a consequence of having a good education and a public profession, and on like that, depending on what houses they are in. Houses are the key thing. Signs are just a vehicle for the exchange. The houses are what you really need to know in order to make an interpretation regarding that exchange.
Sure, I think houses add meaning and topics to in terms of helping us interpret something in a natal chart. So going on, the exchange between the benefics, the exchange between the malefics, and the exchange between one benefic and one malefic. So the exchange between benefic is probably okay. The exchange between malefic is also fine, but the trouble starts when there is an exchange between a natural benefic and a natural malefic. But if we put the lordship or deal with the houses there, I think it kind of clears all the doubts and gives us a clear set of examples. But still, how do we deal with the natural benevolence or maleficence of a particular planet when they are involved in a mutual exchange?
Well, you know, I put that in, I know that's in my book, and I knew it would come back to haunt me someday. We don't want to stress too much about the benefic versus the malefic nature of a planet. Here's one reason why. If you have a Capricorn or an Aquarius ascendant, Saturn, the prime malefic, is not a bad planet for you.
Sure.
It is you, right? So we have to be wary of that notion of lumping planets as natural benefics or natural malefics. The key thing is, do they own good or bad houses? And what will be the consequence of having affected an exchange between the two of those? But in a way, you know, every exchange has some benefit, because it ends up in our mind's eye, it ends up transferring one of the pair, or actually both of the pair, into the houses which they actually own. The fact that, you know, I like to come, I'm fond of analogies, and so one of the analogies I use is like, okay, let's say you and I agree to swap houses for 3 months. You're going to live in my house, I'm going to live in your house. I will presume that you're going to take good care of my house, because You know that I'm living in your house while I'm living, and vice versa. We're living in each other's house, so we will take care of each other's place. So there's a benefit going on there no matter what. And that's the beauty of the exchange. I wanted to go back to one other thing that you said, referring to Western astrology, and you thought maybe they had a better handle on mutual reception. It's not true. In Western astrology, the whole notion of mutual reception is a bit of a mess. And most, even some well-known brand name astrologers whose names I will not name, will say something like, if Mercury and Saturn are in exchange in the chart, that will make the person deep and philosophical and a scientific type, or they'll be depressed because Mercury is thinking and Saturn is a downer. Well, that's just not true. We do not blend the meanings of those two planets like that. What is important is that what houses do they occupy? The exchange, the mutual reception between them facilitates a cooperation between those two houses. Another analogy would be an international diplomacy. If you have the ambassador of India sitting down with the ambassador of Pakistan, what you get is not a merger of their two personalities. What you get is some sort of working agreement that makes both of those countries happy. The two ambassadors are just agents of a cooperative agreement. It's not about them. They're just agents to make it happen.
Okay. I think that's well put. I think analogy worked much better. So, coming back to the Western astrology notion in terms of the mutual exchange, when it comes to the mutual exchange in Vedic astrology, I think we are the first people to put the ruler of a particular house as a functional benefic or functional malefic, and that is entirely a very unique feature that Vedic astrology has. And what I mentioned about Western astrology is that I meant to say that two planets, just as planets have much more importance in terms of speaking of mutual exchange without the houses. That's what I meant. But it's not that Vedic astrology doesn't have a good amount of information in mutual exchange. We largely concentrated on the houses stuff, as you mentioned. So I think it is kind of good to bridge both those things. But I think you have a different ideology here in terms of you mentioned the Saturn and Mercury mutual exchange, which I think is an area of research for me, but maybe not for you. You have done a lot of work when it comes to Parivartana Yoga. So, yeah, apart from that, there are a few other things that I wanted to ask you in terms of Viparita Raja Yoga. Do you think just the mere connection of 6th and 8th Lord will really, I mean, not connection, but mutual exchange of the 6th and 8th Lord will create an actual positive Viparita Raja Yoga? Or the 6th and 8th, but 6th and 8th, or 8th and 12th, or 6th and 12th, whatever it may be.
Yeah, well, there are two different varieties of Viparita Yoga. One says that the Lord of the 6th needs to move to the 8th or the 12th, while the Lord of the 8th moves to the 6th or the 12th, or the Lord of the 12th moves to the 6th or the 8th. Just having one of those happen in the chart, like the Lord of the 6th going to the 8th, that's not really, maybe that's a Viparita Yoga, that's a very minor kind. You need to have at least two of those things happening in order to call it a Viparita Yoga. And they refer to when all three are happening, it's called a full mala, Viparita Yoga. But to answer, and then that's one variety. It's a planet, a Trikashtana lord, moving to another Trikashtana, not its own. So in other words, you can't have the Lord of the 6th stay in the 6th, while the 8th and the 12th exchange places. That would only be one instance. Well, that would be two, actually, 8 going to 12 and Lord of 12 going to 8. That would be. But the Lord of the 6th staying in the 6th does not count. that's one variety, the Trikashtana lords moving to other Trikashtanas. A second variety of Viparita Yoga is when the Lord of the sixth and the Lord of the eighth, for example, are found together in the first house with no other association of any other planet. So this is like saying, here's two bad guys, a convicted murderer and a Hell's Angel biker, and they want to fight each other. You say, okay, go to an empty parking lot and fight there. So long as there's nobody else in that place, then it's fine. You can fight, you can kill each other, and that'll actually be good for society, right? So the criteria is that two Trikashtana lords can go to an empty house and fight there, and that's a Viparita Yoga because the two bads cancel each other and make it good. However, if there is another planet there, that's like saying, okay, we've gone to fight, but we've gone to fight in a schoolyard where children are playing. So when the sticks and stones and knives come out, someone else might get hurt. There will be collateral damage. And so that will ruin that type of Viparita Yoga. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. Was it just in the context of Parivartana Yoga, the combination of Parivartana and Viparita?
No, it's a combination of Parivartana and Viparita because the Parivartana gives rise to Viparita Raja Yoga.
Yes, it can. Yeah, if you have an exchange of the 6th and 12th lords, let's say. Yeah. Taylor Swift is the pop star is a famous example of an exchange between 6th and 12th. And you might say, well, that promises some degree of difficulty health-wise, you would think. But for her, when the 6th and 12th exchange, you end up in your mind's eye with a very strong 12th, with a 12th lord in its own place and the 6th lord in its own place. That may produce an active sex life, but no marriage. Because when the 6th is activated, the 6th is the 12th from the 7th, and so it ruins relationships. And when the 12th is activated, it's good for bed pleasures, no matter whether that's a benefic or a malefic pair. So, I mean, thus far, her love life is irregular, let's say. She's not settled down, and she's had lots of famous boyfriends, and that's okay because that's acceptable in modern society. So that's not a judgment call, but that may be a Viparita in that respect, that what would seem to be problematic is actually working out very well for her.
Okay, great. So I think you kind of quickly rolled out all that was needed for this particular episode of Parivartana Yogas, but I think we'll have a further even more lengthier discussions by getting into finer aspects of Parivartana Yoga, and maybe we can also analyze with one or two charts if time.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. I mean, talking about it abstractly, it can be difficult for the viewer to understand what's going on, even when we talk about something as simple as a Mars-Jupiter exchange in Aries and Sagittarius. Nothing makes it more real than having an actual chart to see in front of you. And an excellent example for that would be Indira Gandhi.
Maybe can I just share the screen of Indira Gandhi's chart, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
You have a North Indian version?
Yeah, we can add that.
I could actually show you the version
Sure.
Myself.
Sure.
Can you see this? Can you see my screen?
No.
Okay, I don't know what I need to do in order to share my screen. I've forgotten what to do.
Okay, you have a green button in the middle down.
Yes, okay, screen share. Okay, I click that and then I go back to the screen I want to show you.
You just click the share. You click the green button there and then you click the blue button in the dialog box which shows us share.
Yeah, okay, I've got that. And then I want this one here to share. Whoops. Okay, can you see that?
Yeah, it's there.
Okay, can you see it better now?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, so this is Indira Gandhi, and I've listed the three exchanges that exist here. So there's Saturn and Moon in 1 and 7. So Saturn is in Cancer, sign of Moon.
Mm-hmm.
Moon is in Capricorn, sign of Saturn. So this is what we call a Maha Parivartana, because it involves the exchange of two positive houses. The positive houses are 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 10, and 11. So this is qualifying, 1 and 7. So when you do this, you can effectively say Moon flips over into the first house and Saturn goes into the 7th. So when Saturn does that, it achieves its own sign, Capricorn, but it also picks up Digbala as well. And so Saturn is kind of the greater beneficiary of this exchange, what we call the control planet for this Parivartana Yoga. But in any event, themes of both the first house and the 7th house will emerge hugely in her life. So, you know, Saturn in the first, one of those things for her was, you know, she was not very healthy when she was young. While she was at university, she missed like a half a year because she was seriously ill. The whole thing about relationships has been a problematic one for her. She had a husband who was an alcoholic womanizer and caused her no end of emotional grief. The 1-7 exchange, I mean, it's also good for public performance and being in the public eye, being a spokesperson of one's people, assuming great responsibilities with Saturn in the first, being very attached as a representative of one's people. Diplomacy and on an international level became a big deal with her. I mean, she was a proponent of what was later called the Indira doctrine, which was, you know, preserving and guarding India's borders. And in the course of her rulership, you know, there was a minor war with Pakistan and another one with China, which was, you know, to erupt into something much larger. So, you know, those are just some of the themes that came out in that particular exchange. Then she also has an exchange between Mars in the 2nd and Sun in the 5th, between their respective signs, Leo and Scorpio. So again, this is another positive, a Maha Parivartana Yoga, because it involves two positive houses, 2nd and 5th. So themes of family, that's one thing. And Indira Gandhi came from a famous family, you know, Nehru, and then even her heritage, you know, her sons became well known in politics as well too. Speaking of sons, children, there was some hardship there, and these are major themes as well too. Even though the exchange facilitates the success of children, there can be problems as well too. So, you know, one son died in a plane accident and another was assassinated. Even you can look at it in different ways and say the 2nd house is education. Mars there is a bit problematic. So she had difficulties in her education. She wasn't the best student, missed certain schooling. Economics was not her forte either. You know, she had 3 5-year plans, and economic problems really dogged her throughout much of her tenure. Last but not least, if I have time to cover this one is interesting, the exchange between Venus and Jupiter in 6 and 11. So Venus sits on the Rahu-Ketu axis. That's an important thing to know. And exchanges with Jupiter, which is retrograde, therefore bright and strong. So this is what we call a Denya Parivartana Yoga. It's problematic because it involves a Trikashtana. So what it invokes is some of this notion of alternation between friends and enemies. The 11th is friends, the 6th house is enemies. And so she experienced severe highs and lows in her political life because who were once her allies at one point became her enemies, who
Enemies.
once were her enemies became her allies. She was in and out of jail a couple of times. It's almost unheard of to think of today for a modern leader of a country to have this happen to her. And then, of course, most famously, the sixth house reflects one's servants or the people that one works for. After she allowed for the destruction of a famous Sikh temple,
Yeah.
and the whole Sikh constituency in India became very aroused in anger against her, what happened is that she was eventually assassinated by her own two bodyguards, her employees, who were Sikhs. And this is the sort of thing on the Rahu Ketu axis. It might very well have been a consequence of some karmic injustice from the past that set up this whole sort of situation wherein she would have employed Sikhs as bodyguards rather than, some other, people of a different caste or background or whatever. Anyway, so that's sort of a quick crash course in, this is an amazing chart because only one person in 10,000 has 3 Parivartana Yogas. No more are possible because you only have 7 planets to work with. So you can only have 3 exchanges and that's it. But the chart is truly remarkable for that reason.
For sure. And
okay,
as you said, it's just a quick crash course in Parivartana Yogas.
Let me try to unshare that if I figure out how to go back to do this. Where are my controls?
You can just click stop sharing on the top.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Okay. Done.
Okay. So, yeah, I think it was a very good session to begin with, and we'll probably get back sometime soon with much more in terms of discussing much more finer things in your book with more examples. Yeah, I think if you want to purchase this this one of the most important books in Vedic astrology, I think you can find it almost everywhere. It's there on Amazon, and you can find the link on navamsha.com, which is Alan's website. So is there courses that you teach, or you want to talk a little bit about your website so that people can just go and check out?
Well, yeah, I do 2 things basically. I give consultations, of course, and I do private tutoring for intermediate and advanced students. And as I said, I've stopped writing novels and I'm just writing astrology books. I've written Parivartana Yoga. Back in November, I published a book on Kala Sarpa Yoga, which again is a subject that nothing was written about. I mean, because largely it springs from an oral tradition of southern India. So very little has been written about it, and a lot of people, do not believe in it. K.N. Rao even wrote a book about it, which is basically against Kala Sarpa Yoga. But I think it's more about disputing, it's used by unscrupulous astrologers to scare clients into thinking that they have to get a puja or yagya or whatever in order to fix their problems. But anyway, I did a great deal of research. I became fascinated by the subject and spent 18 months researching and writing that book. Anyway, that's another one. And then I have a couple of other books of essays, technical articles, and so on and so forth as well, too. This is my passion these days, basically writing and speaking about astrology because it's such a fascinating subject, and it's a constant learning experience for me as well, too. And I hope for my readers and listeners. I've started doing stuff on YouTube myself, and this coming year will see me involved in a lot more conferences than before.
That's great to hear. And to give a final touch, Alan's books are Stellar Astrology, Mutual Reception, Parivartana Yoga, and Kala Sarpa related to astrology. I'll share the link in the description page, and we'll see you soon. Thank you so much, Alan, for joining.
Thank you so much, Aswin.